Hey guys, in this video we're going to talk about this German Model L flare pistol from World War II. We're going to go over the history of this gun, talk about some of the weirdities, and kind of why even a double-barreled flare pistol exists. In 1935, the German Air Ministry placed new guidelines for flare pistols that they wanted on aircraft. Amongst these guidelines was one for a double-barreled flare pistol. Now there's a myriad of uses for flare guns on an airplane already. They can be used for signals, saying, your radio is out, or to attack, or whatever. There's a myriad of reasons why maybe you'd want radio silence and you would need sort of visual communication on an aircraft. And what a double-barreled flare pistol allows is kind of another dimension of sort of flare language. So say if you only had like red and green flares, right? And say you had a single barrel flare pistol, well, you could shoot red once, that means something. You could shoot green once, that means something. Well, if you have a double-barreled flare pistol, that means you could shoot green and red simultaneously, which is sort of like a third meaning behind it. So this increases sort of what you could say with a limited number of flares. So there is kind of a good need for this, actually. It just kind of seems weird, maybe to us, with our sort of modern minds. Now these were meant for, not like for fighter planes necessarily. Fighter pilots and the like, they just got the kind of regular single-barreled flare pistol. These double-barreled flare guns were meant more for like reconnaissance aircraft, naval spotting craft, that kind of thing. Kind of like the more maybe boring or slower kind of aircraft got these double-barreled guns. Now when the guidelines were placed for this in 1935, the German military actually already had a standard flare gun, kind of just barely already had. With this one here, this is an LP34 flare pistol. So this is kind of the whole standard issue flare gun to the whole German Wehrmacht. All branches use this single barrel variant. It's a pretty simple design, really. You just have this trigger guard mounted lever to sort of break open the action. It's loaded, closed, and then these have a hammer. So you'd cock the hammer and then fire these. Now this double-barreled one, of course, has to kind of fit that a little bit. So it has this trigger guard mounted lever, but with the addition of this extra barrel, you kind of have other considerations to kind of be aware of. So instead of having two hammers that have to be cocked, this switched to a striker system. So there's just two strikers in here. You don't have to worry about pulling the hammer back. I'll show close-ups of this later on, but there is a barrel selector. So you can select if you just wanted to shoot one barrel or the other just by moving this on the back. And then there is a safety. Now don't let the fact that this is just a flare pistol fool you. This thing is by no means simple. In fact, to kind of do everything that the German Luftwaffe wanted in this double-barreled flare pistol, it takes over 80 individual pieces to make this flare pistol. So it's by no means cheap or easy to make. There's only 4 makers, maybe 5, that actually made these. I say maybe 5 because there's about 1,000 of these that are unmarked. So it's hard to tell who exactly made that one. But the makers I'll just go ahead and put on the screen here for you to look at. You can tell that Krieghoff is the sort of largest maker of them, just kind of slightly. Now Krieghoff, he had a personal connection with Goering, so he had close ties with the German Luftwaffe. He was already doing other contracts for the Luftwaffe. He's most known for the Lugers. So it's probably easy for him to kind of get some of these contracts. I'm sure he had probably the best contracts out there from all the manufacturers. I mean, he's already proven that he can do stuff really well, like with his Lugers. If you could build Lugers, you could probably build flare pistols. So he built the most. That happens to be what this one is. This is a Krieghoff one. So it's kind of neat that it's Krieghoff to me. It's kind of neat that like these different gun companies made flare guns, which is it's actually true for just about all of them. This LP34 that I showed you here, this was made by Berlin-Lübecker. So this is DUV marked. So the same company that was making K90Ks and then switched to G41 and G43 production, they also made flare pistols. Irma made flare pistols. JP Sauer made flare pistols. So this is kind of a cool thing to collect if you wanted to collect flare guns to go along with like the guns that you collected. It's kind of neat like that. It's kind of one of the neat things about collecting these flare guns in general. There's lots of variations of these. You know, like I said, you can kind of go in and want to collect, you know, one of each maker, stuff like that. Now, it's not super easy in today's market because it seems like any double-barreled flare pistol is automatically, you know, at least twice as expensive as like a single-barreled version. I mean, there's already going to be, you know, of course, these are way less common, but there's also kind of a cool factor with these double-barreled flare pistols. So it's just going to be a little bit more. If you find these, it's going to range from anywhere between like, you know, 500 up to 1,000 or plus right now for one of these. Of course, maybe by the time you're watching it, it's, you know, even higher than that. So, I mean, you're kind of getting into gun territory. You could kind of buy a really nice gun for the price of one of these. But I think it's really cool. You know, like these are non-guns in the United States. So like you can send these in the mail and, you know, and collect them and whatever. And it's just kind of a non-issue as far as that goes. So that's kind of cool. It's also neat that these resemble guns and are very similar functionally to guns. But you could shoot flares out of these. And flares are kind of cool. There's lots of different 26.5 millimeter flares that you can get for these. Illumination or star. There's lots of cool kind of things you could do with this. So, I mean, you could really kick up your 4th of July celebration by getting one of these. So they're not completely, you know, useless. And I think it's, you know, it's one of those things. A lot of gun people probably don't care about flare guns that much, and I get it. I didn't for a long time. This is a fairly recent thing for me. But I think that's kind of a good thing, really, if you wanted to kind of branch out into a new thing to collect. Because, I mean, these things aren't very expensive as far as like these LP34s. These are just kind of a few $100. You can get the later models too for even cheaper sometimes. So they're really fun for collecting, and I think it's kind of neat to branch out maybe sometimes into other things. You know, like if you're, like say if you're just a really big gun collector, you know, it's kind of neat to be able to buy things other than guns that gun maker maybe made during the war, after, or whatever. So I think there's lots of collectability there. Now let's do some close-ups, and I'll kind of show you some of the functionality and markings of this gun up close. Now here's the left side of the Model L. You can see this black paint-like finish, which I'm sure is just some sort of fancy anodization. We see this black plastic or BIC-like grips on it. These are serrated, so they give it gives a very nice purchase overall to the gun. Definitely doesn't feel like it's slipping out of your hands with these grips. Overall, the grip kind of trigger configuration, everything, it feels very revolver-ish. So it's not bad at all, kind of just, you know, grabbing a hold of this thing. Now on the left side here, you'll notice this lever. This is actually a safety, which is kind of unusual, a flare gun with a safety. But if you think about this flare gun loaded up with 2 flares in the confines of an aircraft, you probably don't want that accidentally discharging. You could take down the entire airplane, possibly kill everybody on board. So this is a pretty big safety feature that they wanted on this pistol. Now on the rear of the flare pistol, we have the barrel selector. It's pretty straightforward. You just have an L and an R, and you would just move this over to the left if you wanted to shoot the left barrel. Now it's also sort of counterintuitive because when you move this over to left, it covers the L, meaning the R is exposed. But in this case, the R is not firing, but the left is firing. This is counter to the safety. Here we see the S is exposed, meaning that the safety is on and the pistol will not fire. However, if we move this over to the S and the F is exposed, it will fire. So it's kind of slightly counterintuitive. Now it might be hard to tell here, but there is a line running down the center of the trigger. What that actually is just really the separation between the 2 triggers. This gun has essentially 2 triggers that just kind of forms this one kind of mono trigger, meaning that when you actually have this selecting just one side to fire, really it's just the left side of the trigger that pulls. You do pull the right side as well, but a way of thinking of it is the safety is on the right trigger, so it doesn't do anything when you pull it, but it is on the left side. I'll just go ahead and demonstrate that here. Now both triggers are being pressed, but if you look at the cocking indicators in the back here, the left is depressed, meaning that it fired, but not the right, which is just sort of interesting. Now if we move this back over and pull the trigger again, pulling both triggers, and that other barrel fires. So it's just kind of an interesting kind of double trigger setup where it's almost like this is two flare pistols smushed together more so than one solid gun. Now, probably the most interesting part to me is whenever you go to pull this lever to break open the design, you're doing multiple things at once. The first thing this is doing, very similar to a shotgun when you break the action over, is that it is cocking the strikers inside. So when you go to pull this lever, you are overcoming quite a bit of force to cock both of the strikers inside of this flare gun. Now it's also doing two other things. As I pull this lever, you will see that it is actually re-engaging the safety. So the safety will move over, and it is also going to align this barrel selector to the middle. So this is kind of hard to do on camera, but I'm going to pull this lever very hard. It's a considerable amount of force to actually open this thing up and do all of those actions at once. So I'm just going to try to do this here and listen for all the distinctive clicks that happen. So you might have seen there, breaking this open, it recocks both strikers. The barrel selector is now in the middle and the safety is on. That is quite a bit more force to open these when it has to do all those actions at once. I mean, now opening it up after everything is done is very easy. This isn't quite as spring-loaded as the LP34. You still kind of have to open this up by hand. But this is just sort of really interesting because it does all those things. Now compare that to the LP34. You'll see this kind of flies open with a lot more force. And that's because it is under a considerable amount of spring pressure to sort of break this action open very fast and eject the empty flare. This is hammer fired, so it doesn't have to worry about recocking a striker. So this it's much easier to reload this, but again, it is just a single-barreled mechanism with no other additional features. So it's just kind of more plain compared to the other model. Now that's about as far as the similarities between these go, other than overall size. The LP34 and the Model L, very similar in size, very similar barrel lengths. But this is considerably heavier. The Model L is considerably heavier than the LP34. Now there's a couple pieces of information to pay attention to on these pistols. Here on the left side, you'll see kind of a series of numbers, and you might think that is a serial number, but it is not. This is actually a requisition number that was stamped on all of these. All of these guns will have the same exact series of numbers. That is the requisition number. Now, in the front, you'll see a couple letters here. This is LN. This is actually for ground. You'll also see FL. Now the FL in front means that that flare gun was meant for planes, and an LN is meant for ground troops. So this one here is actually meant for ground troops. Now here in the back, you'll see this manufacturer code. Now this is what you'll want to look out for to see who made your flare gun. Now this is FZF, which is the code for Krieghoff. So that's how I know that this is a Krieghoff made gun. So we have the requisition number, we have if the gun was meant for the ground or the air, we have the maker's code here, and then on the other side, we have the serial number. And here on top of each barrel, we have these little tiny proof markings for each barrel. This is just pretty common practice in Europe, and the Germans sort of continued it for all their firearms during the war. And yes, these are smooth bores. These are flare pistols. They do not require rifling, so these will be smooth bores. In fact, this probably looks very similar to a shotgun, really. Now, obviously, this thing is pretty bulky. It's also kind of heavy to go along with that. It is 1,010 grams or 2.7 pounds. Now, compared that to the standard single-barrel version here, the LP34, this is 700 grams or 1.5 pounds. Just having just picking this thing up, it feels way, way lighter. I mean, this is about half as light as the double barrel version. Now the Model L can kind of get away with being, heavy and bulky because it wasn't really meant to be carried around. This is just kind of meant to be stationary. This just sat, like next to a runway on the ground, or this sat somewhere in an airplane, for communication purposes. Kind of rarely used sorts of things. So it can be just kind of heavy because it's just kind of meant to sit around. And in fact, there was no standard issue holster for these. There were some like custom jobs, but there wasn't like a standard issue holster that was issued with these. There was a standard issue holster for the single-barreled LP-34 though. It has a lanyard. It was carried around by the lanyard sometimes. It was kept in a holster when it wasn't being used. And it's a slim design. It's a very light design because this was meant to be carried in the field. The LP-34s would be pulled out, and you could signal an attack or retreat or whatever can be done with this. So this was an important piece of battlefield technology. The Model L just kind of is its own sort of separate thing. I know we kind of lump all flare guns together, but this really had very different intentions. So it's kind of neat. If you like Luftwaffe stuff, this is cool. German Luftwaffe history here. If you like flare guns and double-barreled things, it's cool with that too. And now if you like this and you want me to make a video on the LP-34, let me know. I can do a video on this one too, but I'll probably can tell by how many people watch this video if I should do a video on this one. I know this is kind of a niche topic, so I appreciate you guys for watching, but yeah, comment and let me know what you think, because that's the only way I know what you guys want. I read all the comments. So thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.